why do I want to go international, right? Have I saturated my market, my home market, right, before going international? And I'm not saying that you need to have saturated your home market before doing that, but you need to make sure that you are sitting on strong bases in your home country.
So, Thierry, before we get into all these global growth strategies that we're going to talk about, could you introduce yourself and tell us what we do, and also a little bit about QSR Consultant?
Sure. So my name is Thierry Rousset. I'm French. I've been living in Spain for the past 25 years, and I run a franchise consulting business specialized in food service. So basically, everything we do is related to the restaurant business. We work with restaurant chains of all sizes, and we address many different topics, from overall organization, franchise or franchisee relationship. It can be about supply chain. It can be about marketing, brand positioning, and international development is something that we do a lot, where we support brands, either smaller brands trying to go international, or larger ones, more established ones, in their search for local partners, whether they are large investors or smaller operators.
So, what exactly is a QSR, and why is franchising such a big deal in this space?
So QSR stands for Quick Service Restaurant. I guess someone had to come up with a name because no brand wanted to be at some point. No brand wanted to be called fast food anymore, right? Just because it didn't sound very very trendy, right? Anymore. So QSR it's basically the same thing as fast food, but the newer name. Some call it, even in some cases, fast casual. There is a thin borderline between QSR and fast casual. Fast casual tending to be more sort of more upscale. So some people would say that McDonald's, for example, is QSR. Probably the most well-known QSR brand, right? McDonald's, KFC, right? And that brands like Shake Shack or Five Guys are more fast casual, right? Again, the line is not very clearly defined, where one category starts and where the and then where the other one starts, right? But so basically all those large restaurant chains that you can find in most countries around the world would fall into that category of QSR. There is actually, to my knowledge, no table service restaurant that has expanded on a large scale comparable to how the QSR brands have been able to do it, right? Another name for QSR is counter service, right? And the opposite of that being table service, right? So it's easier for people to understand that how it works, even though it is less and less counter service and more with those ordering kiosks, those screens, or even the phones, right? But still the name is still there, right? So now to the other part of the question, why is it that QSR brands have gone so big and have used franchising to grow? Well, I guess the main reason is probably because it's a easily replicable business model, right? It's very, very standardized, right? And the best way for people that are not familiar with the topic, the best way to understand what standardization means in the QSR is probably to watch the movie The Founder, which tells a story about Ray Kroc and the McDonald's brother, right? If you watch this movie, you'll understand the level of standardization and what it means when it comes to operating a QSR restaurant. So because it's very standardized, then it makes for a model that can easily be franchised, be replicated on a large or even very large scale, right? And of course, the other reason is because it's those are usually profitable businesses, right? Probably not as profitable as it used to be at some point because of inflation. Cost of goods have gone up in the past years. Cost of utilities have gone up in the past year, but it's still a good and profitable business, right? So those are really the reason why you can find those brands, those same brands, basically everywhere, right? And there's also probably some, I don't know if we could call it like a psychological effect, right? Which is about security, right? People like, you might like what you find, the type of food that you can find at McDonald's, or not, right? But you can be almost 100% confident that if you go into a McDonald's, you will find, Big Macs, and that Big Macs are the same everywhere in the world, right? And so that's probably part of the success of those brands, even though that would apply in probably Western countries. Now, if you go into less developed countries, it's a different phenomenon. Right? I remember I was in Bolivia many years ago. We did set up the logistics to support the opening of the first McDonald's in Bolivia, right? And the day it opened, right, there was this long line of people, right? And in that line, you would see relatively wealthy people, and you would see the typical Bolivian woman with the little round hat and the baby in her back, right? And for people like this, eating at McDonald's was like luxury, right? It was very expensive, right? Very, very expensive. So it was not in this case, it was not even about the food, right? It was about, eating a little piece of America, right? So
That's actually really interesting.
No, really, and I've seen the same thing in Morocco, for example. Same thing. We did set up a supply chain for McDonald's in for the opening of the first restaurant in Casablanca. That's the first and only time I've seen a Rolls Royce going through the drive-through. Right, the guy with the driver and the owner sitting in the back. Right, going through the drive-through. Right? This is not something you would see, everywhere. Right, so.
I mean, I'm old enough to remember the first McDonald's opening in India,
Right.
and I have heard of similar scenes there.
Yep.
Someone from Sri Lanka has told me the same thing about that. Just remembering waiting in line at a McDonald's when it
Yep.
opened in a long line just to have a taste of that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
As you said, the taste of America.
Exactly.
So yeah, it's a really, I guess it's a really fascinating psychology there.
Yeah, it is. It is indeed. It is indeed.
All right. So that, I think, this is a good segue to get into what we were going to talk about.
Right.
So when is a QSR truly ready to go into international markets?
That's a good question. That's a conversation we often have with restaurant chains, right? Going international for a restaurant chain is something that is quite often underestimated in terms of how difficult it can be, right? I was actually talking just 2 days ago with a relatively big brand in the U.S. You know, they have 350 restaurants doing high turnover, right? And they've never gone international, right? And now they're thinking about doing it, and they just have no idea what it means, right? So hopefully we'll be able to support them and take them through this whole process, right? Because going international has implication in every aspect of the business. Right? Starting with language, people tend to underestimate the importance of language. And of course, if you're a U.S. brand, okay, yeah, you're going to go internationally, you're going to speak English, and that's going to be fine, right? But if you're not a U.S. brand, right, or a brand from any English-speaking country, right, French, Spain, whatever, the first thing you're going to have to do is find someone in the team that can speak English, right? And often people will pick up the first person in the team that speak English, even though that person has no other qualification than the fact that she can speak English. And of course you want more than that, but you also need that, right? I'm actually speaking with this French brand that has been trying to get into the Spanish market, and they have no one in the team that speaks Spanish, and they think it's okay, and they've been trying for the past months, and now they're come up to the conclusion that they need someone that can speak Spanish, right? Because again, some countries will be culturally usually smaller, small geographically small countries like the Netherlands, for example, would be very good. Most people speak English, right? But it's not the case in France, not the case in Italy and in Spain, or so that's something that you need to take in consideration, and more broadly, right? It will impact every aspect of how you run your business, right? From supply chain to marketing to operations to training, all those things, right? So, when is a good time? There is probably not a good time, right? But there is for sure a good time not to go, right? And what I mean by that is that quite often I get in conversation with small franchisors, sometimes very small franchisors, right? They would reach out to us and they would tell us, well, we've seen that you support franchisors going international. Can you help us do that? They say, sure, we could look into it, but why do you want to go international? And the reason quite often, at least in this part of the world, in Europe, right, the reason I hear quite often people will say, well, we get a lot of requests for information from investors from Dubai. It's always Dubai, right? And I say, okay, but how many stores do you have in France? And I remember a conversation with this small franchisor, right? And at that time they had 9 stores. And I say, so you've saturated the market? I say, oh, no. There's huge potential in France. I say, okay, so why you want to go international? Well, because we get all those requests from Dubai. I say, well, that's not how you built the strategy, right? That's not the reason to go, right? That can't be the reason to go, right? So you don't want to miss opportunities, right? But going just because someone knocks on your door and say, hey, can I take your brand international, is risky to say the least, right? The best example to that is probably Subway, right? Subway, that was probably, I don't know, 30 years ago. The first ever Subway restaurant outside of the U.S., right? People would think, well, Canada probably, Mexico, right? No. The first Subway that ever opened outside the U.S. opened in Bahrain, in Manama, the capital city of Bahrain, right? You say, why? Why? If you are, and I don't know how many stores Subway had at that time in the U.S., probably thousands already, right? Maybe, maybe 8, maybe 10,000, right? But I can only assume that someone knocked on their door and say, "Hey, can we take your brand to Bahrain?" And, they probably had no idea where Bahrain was, right? So they probably pulled out a map of the world, and it's not easy to find Bahrain on the map of the world, right? It's really a small country, right? And they said, "Yeah, sure, do it," right? And obviously it didn't last very long, right? And they closed, and then after then after that, Subway started with the more sort of strategized development strategy. Some call it in the U.S. the spaghetti strategy. So you take a map of the world, you take a full hand of cooked spaghetti, and you throw it on the map. And wherever it sticks, that's where you want to go, right? Which is, it's I've seen brands with there are brands out there. You look at their international footprint and say, why, if you are, I don't know, a Spanish brand, why do you have 3 stores in Thailand, one in, I don't know, Sri Lanka, one in Australia, and 2 in Chile, right? It just doesn't make sense, right? It's very expensive. It doesn't make any sense in terms of creating value for the brand. It's extremely complex in terms of supply chain. So, so to your question, I guess the first thing that franchisors should ask themselves before going international is, why do I want to go international? Right? Have I saturated my market, my home market, right, before going international? And I'm not saying that you need to have saturated your home market before doing that, but you need to make sure that you are sitting on strong basis in your home country, right? And then you can start about going abroad, and of course you want to do that in an orderly manner. You want to give it some thoughts in terms of strategy, in terms of how you want to go. There are different ways. I guess we can talk more in detail about that. But you want to go for master franchise, joint venture, equity stores. Why not? Or so that's one thing, right? And the other one is just the geography, right? Where do I go, right? The world is big. There are, I don't know, over 200 countries in the world, right? Depending how you count them. If you consider Monaco as a country or not, but around 200 countries, right? So where do you go first, right? And the natural step is to go to the neighboring countries, right? And people say, well, for a U.S. brand, going to Canada should be relatively easy, right? For a French brand, Belgium is often the first place to go because part of Belgium speaks French just across the border, so it should be easy, right? But it's never easy. It's never easy because even though it is geographically close, right, which makes things easier, right? As soon as you cross the border, it's a different world, right? It's a different world. I was in Belgium last week. I was in Brussels last week visiting a Belgium small Belgium burger chain that has done it the other way around. They've opened stores in France, and they are scratching their heads because they say, this is not working the way we thought it would work. And we got into a little more detail, and just the way the menu is set up, or should be set up, right, should be different between those two countries because the way people order is different, right? And as a consequence of that, because they've just done a copy paste of what works well in Belgium, right, their average ticket is €3 less in France than what it is in Belgium, right? Which makes a big difference, right? Yes. It's only €3, but on an average ticket of 22 in Belgium, then you're down to 19 in France, right? Which makes a big difference, right? When you multiply that by the number of transactions, right? So there are a lots of factors to take in consideration, right? And of course, you need to think about whether you're going to be able to replicate the success that you have in your home market, right, into this new market, because um, franchisees or master franchisees or investors are not coming to the franchisor to buy the recipe of a product, right? They're coming to buy the recipe for success, which is not the same thing, right? The recipe of the product is part of the success. But if if the McDonald's franchisees only had the recipe of the Big Mac, that wouldn't be enough, right? So as a franchisor, am I going to have the ability to make my franchisee succeed in another country, right? That's really the key question. And am I going to be able to replicate my model in that country without having to make major changes, right, to my concept? I read something on LinkedIn last week, right, which I thought was really interesting. The guy was saying that the brand, the DNA of the brand is like your body, right, and the changes you need to make when you go into another country is like your clothes, right? So of course, your body is your body. That doesn't change, right? And then you will just dress differently, which I thought was an interesting way of thinking about it. And the best example for that, and you're going to be able to relate to that very easily, is when McDonald's entered India, right? I very often use that as an example, right? Because when you are a brand which success is built on beef burger, right?
Yes.
How do you go into a country where part of a big part of the country, people don't eat beef, right? Mm-hmm. So the question comes at some point is like, if to make the brand work in a specific country, I need to make so many changes to my brand that it's not going to be my brand anymore. Well, the answer to that is very simple. Don't go to that country, right? Don't go to that country, right? And the example of McDonald's, is interesting. Obviously, they adapted and they came up with products, with more chicken, lamb, I believe, and other type of animal protein, right? But of course, this is McDonald's, right? So the brand is so strong that they I don't want to say that they could sell anything; it would still work, right? But this is the exception because again, the brand is so strong, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, in fact, I think a lot of these big American chains here have kind of done that. They have gotten rid of anything beef related, anything pork related, and have stuck to basic chicken. I think the only people I've ever seen, I mean, big chains doing lamb is Burger King. I think they use that as their like differentiator, in addition to having those massive big burgers. So but most of them have rice-based products, like rice-based dishes. They'll have a lot of vegetarian foods. So it's really like the entire fact about how to localize and how much to localize is also really interesting. And like you said, it has to be worth it for the brand to actually do that, because McDonald's is, it's known for localized products everywhere in the world.
Well, yes and no. A lot of people say that, right? But and McDonald's is extremely smart in terms of marketing, right? To the point that everybody believes that they adapt to the local markets. And the reason people believe that is that in France, for example, France is a very interesting market because it's the most profitable market for McDonald's in the world outside of the U.S. Right? With they have 1,560 stores, averaging about 4 million. If you compare that to anywhere else in Europe, on average, McDonald's does 2.5, 2.6 million. Right? So the French burger market is exceptional. Right? And so it's always interesting to look at what McDonald's has been doing or is doing in France. Right? And every time they launch a burger with, one of the many typical French cheese, right, which they do quite often, right? They will shout it to the world, right? And they will have those big billboards everywhere, and then they'll be on TV and all that, right? But the reality is that how much does that represent in terms of sales for them? Most of their sales is still Big Mac French fries and Coke, right? Big Mac and the other products, right? But those local products, right? Those local products that give this local feel about McDonald's being German in Germany and Spanish in Spain and all that. In terms of product mix and in terms of sales, it's not what they sell the most. Now, again, in terms of marketing, it's brilliant. It's brilliant because that people believe that the brand has adapted.
That makes sense. Now that I think about it, I don't think I've ever heard anyone say that they've had the rice bowl from McDonald's. So
right.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah. But like you said, brilliant marketing.
It is.
Very, very clever.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's also, talking about international development, that's also probably why McDonald's again, also Burger King, has almost no presence in Africa. They have presence in 3 countries in Africa, right? Out of 54, right? They are in South Africa, Egypt, and Morocco, right? Outside of this triangle, McDonald's has never even tried to get into any other African country. And believe me, they get a lot of requests from investors. Every time we talk with investors from Africa, they tell us, hey, bring me McDonald's, help me bring McDonald's, right? And McDonald's is not going, right? Burger King is going a little more, right? They have presence, I believe, in 9 countries, right? But presence being, I think it's 2 restaurants in Kenya, 1 in Ghana, 9 in Ivory Coast, and then the same triangle as McDonald's, of course, and then a few more, right? Nigeria maybe, right? Now, KFC has a much broader presence in Africa. There are, I think, in more than 15 countries, right? Which is still not much out of 54, right? But simply because of the nature of their products, right? This is a part of the world where people eat more chicken than beef, right? So, how do you go into, I don't know, Kenya or Nigeria, right? And get people to eat beef, where it's people eat much more chicken.
Yeah. Okay. And so, from all of your experience in helping these brands expand, what's been what have been some of the key differences between brands that have done really, really well and brands that have kind of fizzled out?
But there is, first of all, as I often tell franchisors, right, for many years, international development for restaurant chains was sort of simple, right? It was all about U.S. brands trying to invade the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now it has become much more complex because you have literally brands from everywhere wanting to go everywhere, right? And we're working with many different brands, or we get contacted by brands from literally everywhere, right? You have brands from India wanting to come to Europe. You have brands from Indonesia. There's a big brand in Indonesia called not Indonesia, Philippines. I'm sorry, Jollibee's. Right? Jollibee's the brand that um, uh, is starting to expand in internationally, right? Um, so the one that have succeeded, obviously, has to do with their level of readiness. Even though when they started, the big U.S. brand, when they started, they were surely not to the level of readiness they are today. Right? They made a lot of mistakes, but still, they were sitting on a very strong basis in their home market, and eventually failing in a country um, would not like destabilize the whole business, right? So um, but interestingly enough, most of the brands, even the big ones, they grow internationally more on an opportunistic basis than on a really strategical basis, right? So when we design international development strategies for restaurant brands, right, we have a methodology and we come up with a list of countries, and then we classify them between priority and opportunistic. And I remember doing that a few years ago for a small bagel brand in France, right? They had, I don't know, 60, 50 locations at that time, right? And so I explained the whole thing and the whole process and the priority countries and the opportunistic and blah 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 to the founders, to the three founders, right? I told them, it's not about going somewhere and take a big check and sell the rights for your brand for the exclusive rights for your brand to local investors, and then nothing happens. And so I explained the whole thing, and at the end, one of the founders looked at me and said, "Well, okay, but what about if I get a guy from Dubai that wants to give me a big check to buy the rights for my brand?" I said, "It's your business. You can do whatever you want, right?" that was uh, that was 6, 7 years ago. This brand has never gone anywhere in terms of international development, right? So really, the market is dominated by the big US brand. There is a very small number of non-US brands that have grown to a large scale outside of their home market. There are a few, but not on a large scale, right? And then there's a case of, which is interesting, of international non-U.S. brands wanting to enter the U.S. market, right? And which basically almost nobody has succeeded at doing so far, right? To my knowledge, there are two brands that have done it successfully. One is this Jollibee's from the Philippines. Which you would not necessarily expect a brand from the Philippines to successfully enter the U.S. market. They have. I think they have maybe 300 restaurants now in the U.S. Right, and the other one is a Korean brand called Paris Baguette, which, despite of its name, is not French. It's Korean, right? And they also have a couple of hundred locations, I believe, in the U.S. Right? So what makes the difference really between the one that failed and the one that succeed? I guess the power of the brand has a lot to do, and then the seriousness of the commitment in terms of really going international. Right? uh, uh, you know, is it done as a sort of a side project, right? Or is there a real international development strategy with resources and commitment, right? Or is it just sort of a fantasy? Or because there's a big especially for small brands, for the founder, there's a big ego factor, right? Going to Dubai again, I'm going to Dubai, right? And it's like, wow, my brand is going to Dubai, right? Which is perfectly understandable, right? You've launched the business in your home country. You have maybe 10, 20 locations, and you get someone that wants to take your brand international. Right? I can understand. I don't know if I was in that position, I don't know if I'd be able to resist, the temptation to say, wow, I'm going there, right? So, but um, again, as I was saying before, right? I guess the real difference between the one that will fail and the one that will succeed is the level of commitment, of preparation, and the understanding of the what it um, uh, implies to go international.
Um, so part of this preparation also requires a lot of operational readiness on the brand's part. And what are some of the big operational challenges that brands need to prepare for? Because if you're going into a new country, you're going to have to change. Maybe you're going to have to find local suppliers, partners, so on and so forth. And that can be a nightmare at the best of times.
Right,
So,
right. Um, it shouldn't have much impact on the operation of the restaurant, right? Because the way you operate a restaurant, if again, as we were saying at the beginning, very standardized. So you're gonna want to replicate that almost identically, right? Um, Actually, I published a post on LinkedIn yesterday about Wendy's. Wendy's has just announced that they are entering the Italian market, and somebody was asking me whether they're going to go with fresh beef as they do in the U.S. Right? Wendy's uses fresh meat in the U.S. Right? Um, I don't have the answer to that question. I don't know what they're going to do, but if they were to decide not to go with fresh beef in Italy, that would have some operational consequences, and that would need to be they would need to make the changes to their standard operating procedures and things like that. But beyond specific cases like that, or as we were saying before, McDonald's in India that had to bring in those new products to replace a beef, right? And that required a new set of procedures on how do you cook those things and all that. Right? Besides those very specific cases, purely from an operational standpoint, it shouldn't make a big difference. From a supply chain standpoint, right, it obviously makes a big that's where the big challenge comes, right? Because and it depends if the country you're going to is far from your base, or is it a neighboring country, right? If it's a neighboring country, if it's and I guess neighboring country also depends on the size of your country of origin, right? India, again, is an interesting example, right? Because it's obviously a huge country. So neighboring country could still be thousands of kilometers away, right? But, yeah, or Australia and New Zealand, right? New Zealand is a neighboring country, but, you still need to get on a boat, right? So Europe, from that perspective, is relatively easy, right? If you're a French brand going to Spain, to Italy, to Portugal, all that, it's relatively easy from a supply chain standpoint, right? But what one of the mistakes that many brands have done in the past, especially the US ones, right? But probably all of them have done it, right? Was to say, well, if we open, right, we'll bring everything from the US. I mean, literally. literally everything, right? I was told that here in Europe there are a lot of U.S. military bases, right? And inside those U.S. military bases, you have restaurants and Walmarts and McDonald's and Subway and all that, right? So it's like literally the American territory, right? Um, when they were, I don't think they still do it, right? But when they were building those restaurants or supermarkets, right, they were even bringing the construction materials from the U.S. Right? They would literally bring the bricks and the cement and all that from the U.S. Right? Just like you cannot find bricks in in Spain or Italy, right? So and of course all the products, but even outside is just the military bases obviously exception, right? But for a long time, brands thought that they had to. The only way for them to maintain the consistency was to bring the products from the U.S. Right? It's not the case anymore, right? Now everybody knows and understands that the success will greatly depend on the ability to supply your stores, your restaurant locally, which is in some cases very challenging because when you go into countries that just does not have the industrial capability of manufacturing the type of product that you need, then there's just no other way, right? I remember when I used to work for the French burger brand Quick, and we did sign a master franchise in Turkey, right? And Turkey is a country with very expensive tariffs, right? So importing is not an option, right? You can do it, but the tariffs would kill your business, right? So the import duties would kill your business, right? So you have to redevelop everything locally, right? Which is fine because Turkey has a lot of highly qualified food manufacturers, right? So we were able to do it. Besides two specific sauces, we were able to redevelop all those products, right? So, but that supply chain again, that supply chain is a big issue. It's a big issue, or it's something that needs to that requires a lot of thinking and a lot of planning, right? Because it can kill your business, right? If you're not ready in terms of supply chain, then you just don't have a business, and you cannot think, or it would be a big mistake to think that because this country is not very developed, well, we're going to do sort of uh, you know, not the original version, right, of the brand. We're going to do sort of I don't know how you would call it, right? But
pared down version of it.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, no, that's okay. Those people, I'll just downgrade my standards and my quality because that would kill your business, right? Because the people that would come to the restaurant, they know, they've heard, or they expect that they will find the same product with the international standard, right? So that's so supply chain is a big issue. Training can be a big issue. Again, back to the language issue I was talking about at the beginning, right? How do you train your people, right? The first franchisee, right? Once you have the first one in the country, well, okay, maybe you can use him as the training center for the future one, right? But how do you train the first one if you have nobody in your team that can speak the language?
Yeah.
Or if your training material, your operations manual are not translated or in the right language, right? I remember I did a few years ago. I did a project in India for KFC, right? And I acted as a subcontractor of McKinsey. McKinsey was doing a larger project for KFC, so. but of course, they had nobody in their team that knew about operations and restaurants and things like that. So they hired me to support them, and so I flew to Delhi, and we visited some of the restaurants and all that, and we got into a conversation about their training, right? I say, so how do you train people? And say, okay, we do this, we do that. Then we have on the walls, we have the instructions and the procedures and all that. Say, which language do you put those instructions? I say, in English. I say, well, but can everybody first understand English and second read? And they looked at me and said, the average KFC employee in India, better than me, right? They might be people that are not very educated, right? And I said, can they read? Can they speak English and can they read? And they looked at me like, oh, we never thought about that. We have it on the wall, so it's good, right? Well, so if they can't read it, and you need to find another way to train them, right? Video probably is the best way, right? But you cannot expect that that people will understand your standard U.S. standard operating procedures everywhere. Right? So training language again is a big thing, and then marketing and brand positioning is obviously a very big element, because as we were saying at the beginning, right, when McDonald's is perceived in some country as sort of the place to go, the place to be, right? Especially when it opens and in a new country and so on. Where in the U.S., McDonald's is all about convenience, price, and convenience, right? No one in the U.S. goes to McDonald's because it's fancy, right? Well, in Europe, McDonald's restaurants in Europe are like, they all look very nice and very well designed and all that. So, you need to give a lot of thoughts about how you're gonna position your brand in the market, because the positioning might be different from what it is in its home market, right? So you got to think. I remember we were working on a project in Saudi Arabia for a Spanish brand, right? And they had this presentation, and so the brand is a little on their communication style, and it's a little how do you call it? I don't want to say aggressive, but and they use English terms, and they the first page of the presentation was sort of their slogan. It says "fuck yeah," and I was copied on this email with this presentation that they had sent to people in Saudi Arabia, and I said, "Are you crazy? Are you crazy?" I said, "You don't do that, right? You don't do that. You're gonna offend people, right?" So and say, "Well, but that's how we communicate, and that's how we say." I don't care, right? Or we just stop the project, and you can decide not to go to Saudi Arabia, right? But you have to at least minimum is respect the country, the culture of culture of the country you go into, right? Or we work with this French bagel brand, another one, not the one that I was talking about before, right? And they have about 100 stores, very successful in France, and their communication style is very much on humor, and they like to do very very funny communication style, but always borderline, right? And so they have a lot of things on their walls, right? Like little jokes and things like that. And one of the founders was telling us that the day they opened their first location in Germany, right? And one of the things they had on their wall was this sentence that said, "When I listen to Wagner, I feel like invading Poland." Right? Or another one that was "Life is too short to learn German." Right? But your friends sitting in a restaurant, you read that, it's funny, you laugh. But if you're sitting in a restaurant in Germany and it says on the wall, "Life is too short to learn German," you say, so Yeah, culture is a big
Yeah.
thing. Brand positioning and adaptation to the local culture, which I guess relates to this idea of the clothing that you wear, right,
Hmm.
around the DNA of your brand, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, sorry, I keep bringing this back to India because it's what I know. So, but
Right. No, 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 no.
I think the culture aspect is really interesting because when Starbucks launched in India, Starbucks has invested a lot of money in making their spaces very
Right.
nice because, and I think primarily coffee in many Western cultures is a grab and go kind of thing. It doesn't translate very well in India in the setting of a Starbucks because people didn't drink a lot of coffee in the country at that point when they first entered. It was, we have most coffee consumption happens in the south of the country where coffee grows.
Okay.
Everywhere else is a tea country.
All right.
So, um, so them having to kind of get people into that mindset that coffee is accessible. It's also fancy and premium. So you come in, hang out, we'll give you free Wi-Fi. You
Yep.
can buy one coffee and just spend the entire day there.
Right.
So and now it started off very clearly as a place for um, I guess entrepreneurs, people to come and work because you could buy a coffee, you had internet, you had a place to go.
Yep.
You had a local coffee chain that the coffee day, which kind of centered around meeting people because we don't really do a lot of like young people don't go to bars or didn't go to bars that often because again culturally it's just kind of frowned upon.
Right.
So coffee made a really nice change to that. And what is now slowly happening in certain Starbucks is they're trying to make them internet free zones, which I don't know how far that's going to work in India because
Mm-mm.
everyone wants free internet. There are so many other coffee chains right now that have popped up that all offer the same things and then some.
Right.
So it'd be really interesting to see how Starbucks manages to keep that core audience because at the end of the day, it's a brand that people know and
Right.
think of
Right.
fondly. So, so yeah, I mean, all of these considerations are really interesting from a cultural perspective, but also I guess they have to make sense from a commercial angle.
Right.
So that goes back to what we were talking about. It needs to make sense for the brand to figure out if this is going to work, which means that in certain countries you can only enter with a partner. Like Starbucks
Right.
has a partnership with the Tata Group. So like how do you find the right partner? Which is a very roundabout way of what I'm trying to ask.
Right. And yeah, that's difficult question that we get
Yeah.
asked almost every day, right? By franchisors looking at going international, right? As how do you find those right people, right? Because um, when it comes to finding individual franchisees, there are a lot of things available, websites and things like that, right? But when you're an international brand that has no presence in the country, and you look at you want to find a partner that's either going to become your regional developer, your master franchisee for the whole country, right? Then it is more then it is more difficult. So there are a few big groups, right? There are a few,
Mhm.
and when I say few, um, uh, probably uh, probably less than 25 or 30 in the world, right? That are outside of the U.S. that are very large multi-brand operators.
Right.
Um, and and every time we speak with large franchisors like restaurant brands, right? They would ask us, say, well, do you have contacts with the people at Amrest is one of those big groups. Alsea is a Mexican group that has 4,500 restaurants, a very large subway, a Starbucks operator in the world, right? Al Shaya is a very large group from the Middle East, right? They operate also Starbucks and Americana, and so again, there are probably less than 30 of those groups, right? And every single franchisor wants to uh, be able to knock on their door and get them to become their master franchisee, right? And we spend quite a lot of time explaining those people that um, they have dozens of projects on their desks because everybody knocks on their doors, and because everybody wants again Al Shaya or those groups to be their master franchisee, right? So once you've gone through those, and sometimes they will become the master franchisee for a new brand, and then everybody's happy. But otherwise you have to be able to identify the right partners through networking. It can be through contacts, banks. Sometimes in some cases, in many cases, countries will have their commercial services supporting brands trying to go international. Yeah, I know the U.S. does that a lot. France has a strong organization around the world to support French companies trying to export. So that's also a way to go. And then there are people, I guess, like myself, that we have a certain network of people, and we can support brands in their search for local partners. It's never an easy exercise, and I always tell franchisors that it's not going to happen quickly. It's not going to happen quickly. It's going to take from the day you say, okay, let's start looking for the right franchisee, for the right partner, right? Depending on your stage of preparation, I guess, as a franchisor, right? But assuming that you are, let's say, almost ready, 70, 80% ready, right? You say, okay, now I want to go international, right? Before that day, between that day and the day you would open the first restaurant, right, in another country, it can easily be up to 2 or 3 years, right? So it's not a short-term project. It's not a short-term project just because, um, well, just because the complexity of those deals for first, finding the right partner, agreeing with the right partners, negotiating with the right partner, and then if you make a deal, right, then the partner has to start looking for location, building that location, training their people, and then finally open, right? So we closed a few master franchise deals in Saudi Arabia last year, right? And we had both parties, right? We had the brand, the franchisor, willing to go to Saudi. We had the Saudi investors looking at brands and ready to take on brands and to start growing them in the country, right? Even with that, so again, we had both. Usually, you have one of the two, and you need to find the other one, right? In this case, we had both parties together, not in the same room, but around the same screen, right? And even with that, it took we did 4 deals, right? And the quickest one took a year and a half just to get signed, right? Just to get signed, and then another 6 to 8 months to open the first location.
Okay. Oh,
So
wow.
it's a long process. Of course, in some cases it will be quicker because it's just the right timing, but usually, and I always, I always tell franchisors, be prepared to be patient. Right? It will take
Yeah.
time. It will take
I think everything in this business is just a sounds like a test in patience.
Yes,
So,
absolutely.
okay. So post pandemic, we've seen a lot of newer formats come up. So we've seen
Yep.
ghost kitchens. I've seen some of your posts about ghost kitchens and virtual kitchens and dark kitchens.
Right.
How is this changing the way QSR brands are expanding internationally?
Um, that's an interesting question because indeed it dark kitchen, right? Dark kitchens, which for people that might not be familiar with what a
Hmm.
dark kitchen is basically a restaurant kitchen for delivery only, right? And that offers restaurant brands, a new way to enter a new market, right? Because instead of, as we were saying before, struggling to find the right partners and negotiating with the partners and agreeing with the partners, and the partners start looking for the location, blah, 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 blah. And then finally, I open my first store, right? I can just go into the country, rent a 15 square meters kitchen inside one of those large dark kitchen operator, right? And start operating at a very minimal investment, right? In just a few months, literally, right? Um, so that's interesting. That's interesting. And in some countries, there are a few companies, dark kitchen operators, that are offering even the full service. So not only they would rent the spaces, right, for brands to operate, but they would operate that brand out of their dark kitchen. Right? There's a company in Spain called Quina that does that. There's a company in the UAE, which I believe was the first one to do that, which is called Kitopi. The company in India that did that with Wendy's, which is called Rebel Foods. Rebel Foods was started as a brand operator. They brand virtual brand operator, right? So they had their own brand. They did delivery, and they had those. Many large kitchens with 10 or 12 brands, and they would replicate that all across the country. And then at some point, they became the operator for Wendy's, right? So they would, take a part of their multi-brand kitchen and dedicate that for Wendy's, and Wendy's became available in India through delivery only. Through Rebel Foods, right, which was an interesting setup, and now I believe that Rebel has now become the master franchisee for Wendy's for the whole of India. And there's a similar situation here in Spain with this company called the Quina, which is again does the same thing, right? Except that they don't have their own brand; they only operate other people's brand, right? And they've made a deal with Wingstop, the U.S. brand Wingstop, and Wingstop has been available in Spain through delivery only, right? Um, for, for Wingstop, right? And back to your question, what I tell franchisors is that this is a very interesting approach, right? Because when you try to get into a new country, right, you basically sit down with people and tell them that your brand is going to do great in their country because it does great in the home country, right?
Yeah.
And people can listen to that and say, okay, well, what about if it doesn't, right? And there's absolutely no way to know if it's going to work um, unless you actually open the first location, right? There's just
Right.
just no just no way, right? Now, by entering a country through a dark kitchen operation, right? Even though it's only the delivery channel, right? You'll be able to sort of test the waters, right? You'll be able to offer your product to the public, right? You'll be able to see what people like, what people don't like. You'll be able to make adjustments to your menu. You'll be able to make adjustment to your prices eventually, to your recipes, and to your brand positioning as we were talking about before, right? And that makes a big
Yeah.
difference because then if you do that for 1 year or two, right, and then you start looking for your potential master franchisee for that country, right? Now it's not only talking about how great you think your brand is going to do. It's talking about actual facts and figures. Okay, delivery only, right? But you can tell you would know your average ticket. You would know what people like and don't like. You would have make menu adjustments. You would know your food cost. You would know your labor cost with all the adjustments required because it's delivery only operation, right? But it makes a big difference. Right? It makes a big difference, right? Um, so I've always been promoting that to franchisors. Not many buy into it because they um, have this idea, which I'm not sure I share, that oh, but we want our customers to get the full experience and all that, and that's all very good, right? But again, Wingstop, which is a very successful brand in the U.S., right, and internationally now, right? They're doing it. They're doing it here in Spain, and um, if they were not doing it through delivery, well, they would just not have any presence in Spain. So, is it better to be present through delivery only or not to be present? I think they've made the right decision.
Yeah.
Um,
And I know, and this is this it's like a pilot project at the end of the day,
Sort of.
and
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
yeah, and I think there's a lot. Like I've seen this happen in the CPG space as well. A lot of companies, when they try to enter a new country, they do tend to go through the e-commerce route sometimes because it's just easier to figure out whether your product will sell or not.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
the regulatory aspect is also the investment is a lot lower.
Yep,
Regulations are a lot less
absolutely. Absolutely.
stringent.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. Yeah. It is
eh,
definitely a great way to test the market.
yeah,
But, no market study, no focus group will.
yeah,
It's you need to get the product into people's hands and see whether they like it or not.
that's true. Yeah.
Um,
Um, so do you think this might have an impact on the traditional like prime location models, like
under what? Sorry.
malls and cinema, on these prime real estate model?
Oh, oh.
Yeah.
Um, no, no, I don't think so because those are they're not separate market, right? But well, delivery had become something very important since the COVID, but it's a trend that was there before, right? Um, a lot of people uh, discovered delivery with when during COVID, right? And then I read many articles after the lockdowns and all that, where obviously during the lockdown, delivery sales were through the roof, and then no more lockdown and delivery fell back down, right? Naturally. And I've read a lot of people saying, "Oh, delivery is dead." Delivery is not dead, right? There was this, huge peak, right? But the trend, which started again long time ago, right? The long time ago, maybe 10 years ago or 15 years ago, right? The trend was there and is still there, right? They are uh, uh, especially in a big part of Southeast Asia, right, where they're building. There was projects like this, right, building apartment buildings without kitchens, right.
Yes.
And that's something that you start hearing about that even in Europe, right? So delivery is not something new. It continues to grow, of course, at a much lower pace than what it used to do, right? But the trend has not changed. So to your question, that's there and it lives its own life and sort of parallel to the more traditional prime real estate location, then for which there will always be a market.
Yeah. So, what's your favorite QSR format right now? Is it like a kiosk or a drive-through or delivery? What's
Um,
got you really excited?
Excited. Well, I think we'll see a lot of things happening around automation. We're actually working with a brand, a very, I mean, a unique concept in the world, right? Where they have developed this robot that makes pizza from the dough. I mean, you load the robot with the ingredients and the dough, and the robot will take the dough that it needs, stretches the dough, puts the tomato sauce, puts all the ingredients, puts it in the oven, takes it out of the oven, cuts it, puts it in the box, and hands it out to you. Right? There is nothing similar in the world. It's an amazing brand. It's called Pazzi, like pizza, but the other way around, Pazzi. And I think we'll see more of those because labor has become a big
Yeah.
problem in the restaurant business. Um, so I think we'll see more of those formats, especially in the U.S. Large brands have been making a lot of changes around their formats, smaller restaurants and all that, because again, post COVID, people say, oh no, there's no need anymore to have larger restaurants and all that. I'm not sure that's 100% true. Um, Again, delivery is obviously a big trend. I read somewhere a few months ago that the younger generation prefer to deal with their phone, place their orders through their phones than speaking to an actual waiter, right?
Yeah.
Which is probably a little scary, right? But yeah, I mean the formats might change in terms of how big the restaurants are and all that. But I think it's really about convenience, right? So brands that will
Yeah.
succeed are the ones that are convenient, able to deliver. Able to deliver quickly, you deliver or serve the food quickly, and where the brand has it's more than just a brand, right? Has values, and of course things around animal treatment and all those things. All those trends are influencing how brands operate and how restaurants are, even how restaurants are designed and all that.
Right. Right. Yeah. But I guess all of these trends are beginning to kind of, whether it's ingredient, uh, all of these different ingredient trends that we're seeing, whether it's sustainability, I think it's kind of transcending across category and across type of food now. So really, they're here to stay.
Well, yes and no. I think there's
Okay.
a lot of marketing around it, right? When McDonald's and Burger King introduced um, their meat substitute product, right? There's um, in the US, right? They made a lot of noise about, there's a brand called Beyond Meat, which I believe is the one that either McDonald's or Burger King with selected as a supplier, right, to those patties to replace. And it was not to replace the whole beef patties. It was just an option, right? So they made a lot of noise around it when they launched that, right? It was everywhere on the press and interviews and blah blah blah, and the CEO talking about how great this is going to be and blah blah blah. When less than a year later, McDonald's took it off of the menu, right? Again in the U.S. And Burger King did the same, right? They didn't make that much noise out of it, but the fact is that it was not selling. Right? People
Yeah.
were just not ordering it, right? So I think that the big marketing element around that. I'm personally not a fan at all of those um, uh, animal protein substitute. I think that if you don't want to eat meat, that's perfectly fine, but just eat something else, right? Just eat vegetable or eggs or fish if if you're unless you're vegan, right? But so
Yeah, fair enough.
I mean, it's just
I,
that's just my that's just
yeah,
my position. I think
of course.
there are a lot of things that can be eaten. Well, I mean, again, your country is a great example of that, right? There's very diverse vegan food, which is delicious, and it's not trying to imitate animal protein, right? It's just a different type of food,
Yeah.
right? Which I I think that's perfectly fine, right? But I always struggle with this idea of saying, oh no, I don't want to eat meat, but I want to eat something that tastes and looks and feels like meat.
Hmm.
That doesn't make sense to me. But again, that's just me.
Yeah, it's it's. But are there any like ingredient trends or that you think are really underrated internationally right now that you think have a lot of potential to grow in the coming years? Something that's really caught your attention?
uh, Concepts or brands?
Concepts, even just an ingredient that you think is
Oh,
really
ingredient.
underrated.
Um, well, um, I think those animal protein substitute they're obviously there to stay. What I personally didn't like about it, and it's less and less true, is the fact that it was at the beginning, right? It was just a mixture of ingredients that you could not even read the name of
Mm.
those ingredients, right? Because it was basically so. This is less and less the case. Um, so again, the trend is here to stay, and there is a demand for that, and more broadly, there is a demand for healthier
Yeah.
options, right? So, but brands like again KFC, right? They are still growing, and brands like donuts brands and things like that. They're still growing also, right? So that's wouldn't fall in the healthy segment, I guess. Um, Coffee is a big trend. You talked about it
Mhm.
before. There are those huge chains in China, right? That are
Yes.
taking over Starbucks, right? Brands that most people have never heard of,
Yeah.
that now have
Luckin
dozens of
Coffee, for
thousands of
example.
restaurants. Yeah, looking
Yeah.
coffee. Mixu is
Yeah.
Mixu is not coffee, right? But this is actually the largest restaurant chain in the world as of today. I think they have
Mm.
like I don't know, 45,000 restaurants. Right? McDonald's has for only 43,000. And nobody has heard about Mixu unless you're following what's happening in the industry, and that's 45,000 restaurants in China only. Huh?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. China constantly is surprising the world with how big it is from a local perspective.
Yep. Absolutely.
So the local market is fascinating.
Yep. Absolutely.